This guest is Alyssa Gallagher. She is the head of BTS Spark America, West and Central, and she is a passionate and experienced educational leader, author, speaker, and consultant. She has over 20 years of leadership experience in various educational settings, from district administration to nonprofit management. She is currently the head of BTS Spark, a global education nonprofit that empowers educators to transform their schools and communities. Alyssa's mission is to unleash the intelligence and potential of everyone on her team and in her network. She is a certified multiple practitioner and collaborator, as well as a co-author of 2 books on design thinking for school leaders and educators, and a book on embracing the messiness of leadership, which we'll talk about today. She designs and delivers engaging and impactful learning experiences that help leaders and educators foster a culture of innovation, collaboration, and well-being. She is also a sought-after speaker and facilitator who shares her insights and best practices on leadership, learning, and change. Well, welcome to the podcast, Alyssa.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, we'll start off with a question I ask everybody. Tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to grow.
Yeah, when I think back about my career, it's interesting. I loved being in the classroom. Didn't really ever think that I would move out of the classroom, but things happen, right? And I did find myself working as an assistant principal. I was an assistant principal at an elementary school, a large multi-track elementary school. And I got really excited about it. I got excited about thinking about just the impact that I could have a bigger impact on a school and on a community. And then I started my first AP job, and whoa, like it was nothing what I expected. I sort of found myself working for a principal who really didn't have any interest in was doing a good job of running and maybe managing the school, but didn't really have an interest in sort of improving things or what I could bring to the table. And talk about finding myself in the trenches. Like I started questioning like everything about what I thought I wanted to do, about what I was capable of. Um, I just really like kind of wondered like, am I even cut out for this as a leader? And really felt pretty demoralized. I was sort of given a list of sort of tasks to do's, things like, and anybody who's been an assistant principal can appreciate, but things like testing schedule and bus schedule and discipline. And I felt so far away from sort of teaching and learning and what I felt like I was really called to. It was really a struggle for me. I would say like, wow, that year, um, I was in the trenches.
Yeah, it's kind of that trial by fire as well, when you're in a new role, and also kind of not knowing what to expect, like you said, how that principal was running the school, but also, um, you know, kind of being in a different position as well. So,
Yeah.
how did you get out of the trench? Was that something that after that year you got more used to, or?
I think I had to really how I got out of it. Well, one, I knew that I'm committed. I had to stay with it, right? So I had to sort of dig deep and like find ways to sort of bring my spark, bring my love of sort of improving things to even the most menial tasks. I knew that I couldn't stay there forever. So it did also sort of light a fire under me, to seek out working for another leader, to seek out a different AP position. So it was kind of a combination of like finding ways to bring the spark and the joy and finding ways to connect with kids, getting out of my office from the testing schedules and the whatever other tasks I was giving and finding ways to connect to what I loved. And then, being really intentional about knowing that there were other opportunities. And I'm so grateful that I didn't give up on leadership in that sort of first experience, because then I went on to work with wonderful principals and eventually became a principal and saw, so much opportunity to sort of share that light and that spark and improve and make an impact in other places.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about, is knowing that this isn't the end all be all, right? But you learn from those experiences as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's seeing the good in some of those medial tasks, right? Because they are also, helping run the school and get
They
the
have to get
data.
done, right?
Yeah,
They have
right.
to get done.
So I introduced you as your work, and how you are the head of BTS Spark. So tell me a little bit about what BTS Spark does, and how long you've been working for BTS Spark.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I started working with BTS Spark during the pandemic. So it's been a little over 4 years now. And BTS Spark, we're a global not for profit. We have in the US, we have 300 leadership coaches that work for us. And what we do is we connect. Our goal is really to help develop and grow leaders at all levels in school leadership, right? So anyone from a teacher who's wanting to improve their leadership capabilities all the way through superintendents. We do other things, workshops and webinars, but primarily we connect leaders with executive coaching for, educational leadership at not-for-profit pricing.
And are these people that often reach out individually, or is it sometimes through a district?
All of the above. So everything from, I'll get reach outs from an individual principal who's sort of struggling and saying, I'm experiencing burnout and stress and fatigue and like help, to larger systems who say, we really want to sort of feed and develop and grow and nurture our leaders. So it's sort of a combination right now, with such a need of leaders sort of across the US. We actually have some systems that are working with us, really thinking about their pipeline. How do they grow and nurture and develop their own leaders from within? So it can be any of the above. One of the things that I love so much about the work that I do is having that opportunity to really connect leaders with supports, right? And saying it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this hard. It makes such a difference to have somebody cheering you on in your corner and coaching you to be better.
So what are some of these opportunities look like? Are they sometimes people in their area that might not be in the same district that have more experience in that role? Are they sometimes groups or cohorts of leaders if they're currently getting individual coaching? What is that? What are some of the different options?
Yeah, so for coaching, that's a great question. For coaching, we offer both one-on-one flexible coaching, which is essentially one leader assigned. We go through a matching process to make sure that the relationship is a good relationship, but one leader connected with a professional leadership coach. We know that it's really important for that relationship to be confidential. So we always recommend that it's somebody outside of the district, somebody who, can really provoke and push your thinking, but also has complete confidentiality and is somewhat removed from the work you're doing. All of our coaches are certified leadership coaches, many of whom have experience as educational leaders. So we do provide one-on-one coaching. We also provide small group coaching. So that really just depends. I'm working right now in the state of Washington with a group with a Washington Association of School Administrators, and they're actually putting together sort of like peer coaching groups. So, 4 to 6 superintendents are coming together with a professional leadership coach to, build, to problem solve together, to get better at their craft and what they do. So we also can create custom coaching solutions for people. It's really kind of dependent on what people are looking for in the level of support.
So I introduced you as being an author and co-author on several books, and we're here to talk about messy leadership. You co-wrote this book with Rosie Connor. Talks a little bit about different reasons why leadership can be hard and why many leaders feel isolated. We decided that you'll point out a few chapters to discuss. You said you wanted to talk about the E for emotional connection and the Y for your presence. So tell me a little bit about some of those things.
Okay. Yeah. And if I could just step back a little bit and just give you a 10,000-foot view of the book
Sure.
and why we wrote the book. So at BTS Spark, and Rosie Connor is our global director. She's based in Australia. Over, the last couple of decades, we recognize that, wow, we've coached, more than 20,000 school leaders. That's a lot of leaders. And that means that on the back end, we have a lot of anonymous data to say, here's what leaders, in those confidential private moments with their coaches, here's what they're struggling with. Here are the issues that come up. And so what we did is we analyzed the data we had to say, are there any commonalities? Is it so different to be a principal in the US than it is to be in Australia or the UK or Canada? And, are there any common universal challenges that, like, this is what leaders are struggling with? And if so, can we provide support? And that was essentially our goal. We did identify that there are some very common themes, very common leadership struggles that leaders have. And then we wanted to say, and here are some tools and some things that you can do to help. So we would love if every leader had a coach. We also recognize that that's not in everybody's wheelhouse. They might not have access or funds or time. And so we wanted to provide some of the tools that our coaches provide to leaders. So that's kind of the impetus for it, right? Messy. We coined it as an acronym. One, it captures, I think anybody who's even worked in school, let alone led in schools, understands sort of that messiness of working, in school leadership. And so MESSY is an acronym. Each one of the letters sort of stands for a concept, an aspirational goal. And so there's so much we could dive into. Where do you want to go first, Dana?
So let's talk a little bit about the E in messy for emotional connection.
Okay. Yeah. So one of the things, and we saw this originally, our research started during the pandemic. We happened to be coaching 1,000 leaders at the time, sort of in that March 2020, when, schools were closing and we thought it was going to be 14 days to slow the spread, right? Like in that window, we were coaching leaders and we had some interesting insights as to like, wow, what worked for leaders before, or maybe the expectation for leaders in the past wasn't really holding up as that's the expectation moving forward. And so as that relates to emotional connection, the tools that we share in emotional connection, it's all about helping leaders build deeper, more trusting relationships in the school environment. And part of that is, being willing to, one, drop a little bit of the professional veneer, right? We saw, and I think back to my early days of school leadership, there was sort of this expectation, almost this superhero syndrome, right? Where like I was going to be the leader and have the answers. And so emotional connection, part of it's being willing to drop that, right? Being willing to drop that and be a little vulnerable and humble as a leader to say, like, hey, I don't have all of the answers. And, here's some big questions and let's co-create and let's co-investigate these together. So that's part of the emotional connection. The second part of it is that in a lot of the schools that I worked in, or now that I work with, there seems to be this culture of nice. Like, let's all just get along. Let's play nicely together. And which could be great, but also in a way it ends up stunting. It stunts relationships, it stunts growth, it stunts progress, right? Because what happens to keep a culture of nice is we have to push problems underground. And part of the reason we do that is as school leaders, and I'll put myself in this boat, it's a relationship business. We know that we have to have great relationships with our teachers, with our staff, with our community. And we think that if we tackle some of these problems, we risk kind of damaging the relationship. And so we shy away from it, right? We shy away from giving tough feedback. We shy away from, we lack the courage to tackle some of the bigger problems. And so what we found in our research is actually kind of the flip of that when leaders know how to unearth these problems and have conversations, what they actually do is they build stronger connections, right? They build stronger, more emotionally stable connections that are deeper and are filled with trust. And so that's essentially, what we tackle in the E chapter is giving leaders some of these tools to say, we know it's uncomfortable. We know it's hard. It's even harder if you've been the principal and you come in and you say, hey, in year one, I'm just going to get to know everybody. I'm not going to tackle these things. Well, then how do you tackle them in year 2 and 3 when you've sort of let them slide under your leadership, right? And so that's essentially, we give in that chapter leaders tools. We share examples of leaders who have utilized every tool, and show like how tackling some of these things, one conversation at a time, actually builds stronger, more connected relationships in a school community.
Yeah, that's so important, is to like start off with those connections and not think that you can tackle all the problems. Like you said, have people on your team, work with them, co-investigate. I liked how you phrased that. Let's also talk about the Y in the acronym, which stands for your presence.
Yeah, so the why, in some ways, it's funny when we wrote the book, we really wanted leaders to feel seen. I don't know about any leaders listening, but I know that like, wow, I felt isolated and lonely at times as a school leader, particularly when I was at a school where maybe I was at an elementary school where I didn't have an assistant principal and I was the only, right? I was the principal. And sure, I had principals at other schools, but they were busy running their schools. And so that isolation. So the why really is around, and I would argue in some ways could be the most important chapter because it's focused on you, kind of the leader, right? And so your presence, that chapter is really focused on building confidence as a leader, understanding the mind traps that actually get in your way and hold you back, and then learning how you can overcome this. So in our research, one of the things that we found is that despite all of the degrees and credentials and accolades that school leaders have, many actually suffer from a lack of confidence, sort of have this, imposter syndrome playing in their head. We all have these mind traps at play. And so, in why, what we wanted to do was really tackle, how do we help leaders kind of uncover and bring their very best self in their role, whatever that may be, right? And feel comfortable bringing all of who they are. That they don't have to be perfect. I talked a little bit already about that vulnerability, that humility, but also getting really real and saying, hey, there are common mind traps that hold all leaders back. So if we can actually know what those mind traps are, then we have ways to overcome them. And so it's both kind of a combination of really getting to know yourself and having that emotional awareness of who am I as a leader and what are some of my blind spots, right? And even giving leaders some strategies and some tools of ways to uncover what those blind spots are. How do you continue to grow and evolve as a leader? So when I think about the mind traps, people will ask like, well, what are they? What's a common mind trap? And so there's six mind traps that we share in the book. But two of them that I think almost always resonate with every education leader that I've ever met is a pleaser, right?
Mhm, mhm.
We're going to keep everybody happy. Like if everybody's happy, and these mind traps, they actually come from our core values. So we shouldn't fault ourselves for having them. But, if I'm a pleaser, I tend to go in that role because I care about people and I have empathy for people. But after a while, it can make me actually have some resentment in my work. I might actually not make good decisions trying to please everybody. So there's some real challenges that come with these mind traps. Another really common mind trap is martyr. And boy, did I struggle with this one, right? I'm going to be the first one on campus, the last to leave. I'm going to take everything on. I'm going to try to remove things from my teachers' plates as much as I can. Well, guess what? It comes from a good place, responsibility and care. But if I operate in this martyr mode, it actually breeds sort of resentment and irritation after a while, right? Like, why am I always the one to do it? Can't anybody solve their own problems around here? And so, we share this so that one, we want to shed light on it and have leaders feel seen that you're not alone, but also show there's a better way, right? So if you know that you suffer from being a pleaser or a martyr, like own it. And then like there's a better way around that.
Yeah, that's important to think about, like how that is, those are very common, and how, to be able to be emotionally aware of if you're falling into that um, habit, right? And what you can do to really, I would say, step away from maybe being the martyr all the time, right? And what are some things that, if they do fall into some of these mind traps, that you prescribe people start doing? Is it working kind of to focus on other skills maybe in being present, or is it really just studying kind of what things people need to use to grow?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, first, it starts with a lot of self-awareness, right? And it's funny, I think, as especially in educational leadership, we all come from the teaching world. We move into leadership roles, maybe without even a real intentional plan. We find ourselves leading, and sometimes we're not even, I think, sure how we got there. So we always say, like, it starts with a lot of self-awareness, a lot of reflection, a lot of, just kind of getting in touch with who you are and really owning, right? This is who I am as a leader, for good or for bad. And then we encourage all of our leaders, anybody who's working with a coach or not, to spend a little bit of time reflecting, to really think about what are those things that tripped me up, or what were my triggers today. Where were those moments where I didn't show up as my best self? I'm not actually proud. I wouldn't want those on a highlight reel. We all have those. And we work through a process of getting getting leaders to identify their triggers, and not in the moment, right? But outside, reflecting back and going, okay, what were some triggers? Like, wow, for me, a trigger is, way too many unanswered emails coming in from Thanksgiving break. So that puts me into like rapid responder mode, right? I know it's not healthy. So now I know, like, okay, if that triggers me, what's a different? So it's about identifying your trigger and then knowing that we all get to choose a different response, right? I don't have to fall into that trap just because I'm triggered, because I'm building sort of that awareness. I know I get to make a different choice now. And so it's, identifying what are those triggers and making a conscious plan. Hey, the next time I'm triggered, the next time, somebody barges into my office because there's whatever issue, like, this is how I'm going to respond. So it's like planning for these triggers, and then also identifying, like we say, we help leaders understand being in the box and out of the box. How do I get out of the box? I would like this phrase of like glimmers. What are things that, like, when I'm not being my best self as a leader, like, actually get me back? They get me grounded and connected to what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and help me show up as my best self. Right. And so knowing what some of those glimmers are, for some people, it's getting outside, getting some fresh air, turning on music. If you're out of school, it's, getting back out with the kids, or sitting on the carpet in a kindergarten classroom, or, walking out the halls in high school while their kids are changing periods, or whatever it is, like finding those moments and those glimmers that really kind of help you.
Yeah, no, that's a good thing to ponder, right? As people are thinking about these mind traps they fall into, and really reflect upon those triggers as well. So you do a lot of professional development for staff, and you also do speaking engagements. What are some of the topics that you often speak on? Are they related to a lot of these mind traps and also emotional awareness?
A lot of them are around right now, with the book being released, around messy leadership, right?
Okay.
And really, how do you develop and grow your own leadership skills? We also do a lot of work around building your own signature leadership style. How do you intentionally grow as a leader? What does that look like? We do a lot of work around just burnout and resilience, on helping leaders, understand the signs, the symptoms, and really action planning around that. And then I still continue to, speak and on my love of design thinking and transforming schools, which actually there's a component of that in messy leadership as well, in the S chapters. So one of the S's is around sensing the future. And that's all about forward thinking leadership. How do you iterate? How do you sort of anticipate what's coming, and how do you run fast cycle experiments so that you don't get stuck in year-long committees that sort of, produce the same as what we've always had. And so there is sort of an element there. So I still do a lot of work with schools as well around sort of pushing boundaries and, are we really leading the schools that we would create if we could create anything? And if not, why not? Right? Like, how do we use constraints to our advantage? And how do we evolve and continue to evolve? I don't think, sort of, as educators, we're evolving fast enough, certainly not fast enough for some of our students.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things we talk about in our professional development or conferences those give us thinking points, but when it's at the school level, it doesn't always happen. And so, yeah, those are the constraints I think that are in play a lot of the time as well. But so
And
that's
so
something
we're
to think
always
about.
wanting, any Yeah, we're always wanting anything we do really to move from theory to action, right? Is like, how can we put it into practice? What does that look like? So typically, we don't recommend any speaking engagements that are one-offs. We always want there to be sort of a series, of follow-up. Like, let's shift either a person or a group of people from point A to point B. Let's shift thinking, and then let's shift behaviors and action so that we can have different results.
So, in terms of the spring and summer of 25, are there any places that people can see you at conferences or maybe at ASCD, ISD, or any of those coming up?
Yeah, so I know, let's see, in March, I know that I will be at the Superintendents Association conference in New Orleans.
Okay.
And then now with ASCD, with the ASCD ISTE merge, that would have normally been another March kind of time frame, but now that they've merged, I believe it's July. So July ASCD ISTE will be there in Texas. And then people can also always find me or BTS Spark on LinkedIn. You can also go to btsspark.org. And BTS are, the three letters, not to be confused with the Korean pop band BTS, but btsspark.org. So you can find us both on LinkedIn. And I would encourage you, if you're interested in learning more about us, we share a lot of free resources via our LinkedIn page. Quite frequently publicize and promote free webinars for folks to join, just on different interesting topics for leaders in education.
Great, great. Yeah, I was going to ask in a moment about the places people can find you, but I have those now. And what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember from this conversation around leadership, messy leadership, emotional awareness, and all those other things we discussed?
Yeah, I think, one thing that I want every leader, every educator actually to always know is how much you matter. And whatever situation you're in, if you're stuck in the trenches right now, if you're struggling, if you're wanting to have a bigger impact, there are ways to do that, right? And so it's finding those glimmers, it's finding ways to share your spark, and really make a difference. And our kids need that. Our schools need that. Our communities need that. And so just, I never want leaders to underestimate the value of what they bring. I know sometimes, in systems, it can feel like, well, we're such a small part. I'm such a small part of a big system. How will I ever change it? But we all have so much in our purview that we can change. And I completely believe in that ripple impact, that small actions from one person, has a huge ripple effect, and you have no idea the impact you could end up having on communities and students and other leaders. So, just knowing you matter and you deserve support in that. I think too many leaders are going at it alone, not realizing that there are supports available.
Yeah, it's really important to remember. So I'll make sure I put those links in the show notes, and people can reach out and contact you individually or via their school or district if they are interested in getting coaching or maybe being paired with a cohort around their needs. Well, it's been great having you on the Out of the Trenches podcast today, and I wish you a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much for having me.